Marcus Hale, a decorated Marine veteran, faces humiliation when a security guard bars his service dog, Shadow, from Westfield Elementary, citing school policy. Despite his legal rights under the ADA, Marcus leaves to spare his niece Emma further distress. A viral video of the incident sparks outrage, and anonymous hate messages flood Marcus's phone. Yet, an email from a mysterious Jay Parker hints at justice. As Marcus drafts a complaint to the Department of Justice, a surprising call from Emma's teacher invites him to a school assembly. What unfolds next could change everything. Stay tuned to uncover the truth. If Marcus and Shadow's story of courage inspires you, join our community. Subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories of resilience and justice. Your support helps amplify voices that deserve to be heard. Click that subscribe button and let's stand together for what's right. Don't miss out. Marcus Hale knelt to adjust the service vest on Shadow, his loyal German Shepherd, ensuring every strap sat perfectly against the dog's sleek black and tan fur. At 38, Marcus still moved with the disciplined precision of a Marine, his broad shoulders squared, his posture unyielding despite the weight of his past. His right hand, occasionally trembling from nerve damage sustained in Afghanistan, betrayed the toll of his service. A faint scar above his left temple, barely noticeable unless the light caught it just right, marked where shrapnel had torn through during his final deployment 3 years ago. The physical wounds had faded, but the invisible ones lingered like unwelcome ghosts. Memory lapses that stole moments from his mind, sudden headaches that felt like a vice clamping his skull, and panic attacks that could seize his breath and leave him unmoored in his own body. Shadow, with his calm brown eyes and steady presence, was more than a companion. He was a lifeline, trained to sense the subtle shifts in Marcus's body chemistry before an episode could take hold. The dog's gentle pressure against Marcus's leg or a nudge of his muzzle could pull him back from the edge, more effective than any pill he had ever been prescribed. Beside him, his 9-year-old niece Emma clutched her Student of the Month certificate, her small fingers crinkling the edges. Her wide eyes flickered with a mix of pride and nervousness as they approached Westfield Elementary's main entrance. Emma's mother, Marcus's older sister, was pulling a double shift at the hospital and couldn't attend the awards ceremony. Marcus had promised to be there, not just for Emma, but for himself, a chance to feel normal, to be the uncle she deserved instead of the man haunted by war. "Are you sure they'll let Shadow in, Uncle Marcus?" Emma's voice was soft, tinged with worry, as she glanced at the dog walking calmly at Marcus's side. Her brown curls bounced as she tilted her head, seeking reassurance. Marcus offered a warm smile, the kind that had once steadied his squad under fire. "It's the law, sweetheart. Service dogs go where their handlers go. Shadow's got my back, just like I've got yours." His voice carried a quiet confidence, though deep down a flicker of doubt stirred. He'd faced skepticism before, people who didn't understand that Shadow wasn't a pet but a medical necessity, as vital as a wheelchair or oxygen tank. "Remember how we practiced?" he added, squeezing her hand gently. Emma nodded, her expression serious. "Shadow's working. We don't pet him without asking. He helps you stay safe." Her words were a mantra they'd rehearsed, a way to prepare her for the curious stares or questions that sometimes came. Marcus's heart swelled with pride at her understanding, but a pang of guilt followed. She shouldn't have to explain his needs, shouldn't have to carry the weight of his invisible wounds. Shadow moved with disciplined grace, his paws silent on the pavement, his service vest clearly marked with certification patches and an ID that declared his purpose. Unlike emotional support animals or pets, Shadow had endured thousands of hours of training to perform tasks that kept Marcus grounded. He could sense a panic attack before Marcus even felt the warning signs, pressing his body against Marcus's legs or nudging his hand to redirect his focus. To Marcus, Shadow was more than a dog. He was a partner who'd saved him from countless unseen battles. As they neared the school's glass doors, a burly security guard stepped forward, his hand raised like a stop sign. His uniform strained slightly at the seams, and his face was set in a scowl that suggested he'd already decided the outcome of this encounter. "Hold it right there," he barked, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "No animals allowed on school property." Marcus's chest tightened, but he kept his tone steady, the same calm he'd used to de-escalate tense moments in combat zones. "Good morning, sir. This is Shadow, my service dog. Federal law permits him to accompany me." He spoke clearly, hoping to avoid a confrontation in front of Emma, who was already shrinking slightly behind him. The guard's eyes narrowed, his voice rising with irritation. "I don't care about your laws. School policy says no dogs. No exceptions." His words cut through the morning air, drawing the attention of parents and children lingering nearby. Heads turned and whispers began to ripple through the small crowd. Emma's grip on Marcus's hand tightened, her small fingers trembling. Marcus took a slow breath, willing his heart rate to stay steady. "Sir, I understand you're following protocol," he said evenly, "but the Americans with Disabilities Act protects service animals. Shadow is trained to assist with my disability. He's not a pet, he's medical equipment." His voice was firm, but not confrontational, a delicate balance he'd mastered over years of navigating bureaucracy and misunderstanding. The guard scoffed, folding his arms. "Don't give me that. No dirty dogs in our school. We've got kids with allergies, health codes to follow." His tone was dismissive, as if Marcus's explanation was a flimsy excuse. The word dirty landed like a slap, and Marcus felt a surge of anger he quickly tamped down. He could handle insults aimed at him, but Shadow, his constant, unwavering ally, deserved better. Emma's voice piped up, small but fierce. "He's not dirty. Shadow's cleaner than most people." Her cheeks flushed with indignation, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she defended the dog she'd grown to love. Marcus's heart ached at her bravery, but he also felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the first warning of a stress response that could spiral into something worse. Shadow sensed it immediately, pressing his body against Marcus's leg, a grounding presence that kept the rising panic at bay. The guard ignored Emma, turning to his radio with a scowl. "I need backup at the main entrance. Got a situation with an unauthorized animal." His words crackled through the device, amplifying the tension. Parents nearby began to mutter, their voices a low hum of judgment. One mother pulled her son closer as if Shadow, a dog trained to remain calm in any situation, might suddenly lunge. Another parent checked his watch, muttering, "This is ridiculous. Bringing a dog to school? What's next?" The words stung, each one a reminder of how quickly people judged what they didn't understand. Marcus felt the weight of their stares, the collective disapproval pressing against him like a physical force. He'd faced enemy fire, survived explosions, but this public humiliation in front of his niece, cut deeper than he had expected. Emma's eyes glistened with tears as she looked up at him, her certificate now crumpled in her fist. "Why are they staring, Uncle Marcus?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He wanted to shield her, to tell her it was okay, but the truth was he felt exposed, raw. The crowd's detachment was worse than their judgment. No one stepped forward to support him, to question the guard's overreach, or acknowledge the law Marcus had cited. They stood back, watching with the passive curiosity of spectators at a minor drama, unwilling to get involved in someone else's fight. Marcus's pulse quickened, and he felt the edges of his vision blur, the telltale signs of a panic attack creeping in. Shadow pressed harder against him, a steady reminder to breathe, to focus. He couldn't fall apart now, not in front of Emma, not when she needed him to be strong. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken tension, as Marcus stood his ground, Shadow at his side, and Emma clinging to his hand. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he wouldn't back down. Not for himself, not for Shadow, and not for the little girl looking up at him with trust in her eyes. Marcus felt the familiar weight of the world pressing against him, but Shadow, his ever-loyal German shepherd, was already there, leaning firmly into his leg. The dog's trained response needed no command. It was instinctive, a quiet anchor in the storm of Marcus's spiraling thoughts. His heart raced, his chest tightened, and the school's entrance loomed before him like a battlefield he hadn't prepared to face. The security guard's words still echoed in his ears, sharp, dismissive, and laced with judgment. Marcus stood there, torn between the fire in his gut urging him to push back, to demand his rights, to call for the principal or anyone who would listen, and the softer, heavier pull to protect the little girl clinging to his hand. Emma's tear-streaked face tilted up toward him, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. And in that moment, the choice became clear. He crouched down to her level, his knees creaking under the weight of his past. His calloused fingers brushed a tear from her cheek, and he forced a gentle smile, though his heart ached with the unfairness of it all. "We're gonna go, Em," he said softly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "This isn't your day to have ruin. You deserve better than that." Emma's lip trembled, her small voice barely a whisper. "But it's not fair, Uncle Marcus." Her words cut deeper than the guard's rejection, slicing into the part of him that still believed in justice, in fairness, in the idea that doing the right thing would be enough. "You're right," he murmured, his throat tight. "It's not fair. But sometimes, kiddo, fighting comes at too high a price." He wrapped one arm around her small shoulders, pulling her close, while his other hand gripped Shadow's leash. The dog stood tall, alert, his eyes scanning the crowd as if he too understood the weight of the moment. Marcus turned away from the school, ignoring the whispers that trailed behind them like shadows, murmurs of judgment, curiosity, and misunderstanding. Each step away from the entrance felt like a surrender, but it was a surrender for Emma's sake, not his own. The world might turn its back, but Marcus's conscience remained, steady and unyielding, even as it carried the weight of their rejection. What the security guard and Emma and the onlookers couldn't have known, what so few people ever truly grasped, was the story etched into Marcus Hale's life. In his modest apartment, tucked away on a shelf where he rarely let his eyes linger, sat a framed Silver Star citation, its words a testament to a day that had changed him forever. In Afghanistan's Helmand province, then Captain Hale had led his platoon through an ambush that should have been their end. Under a hail of enemy fire, he'd orchestrated a counter-assault, dragging 2 wounded Marines to safety while bullets tore through the air around him. The explosion that ended his military career came in those final moments, a deafening blast that threw him against an armored vehicle, leaving him with a traumatic brain injury that still haunted his quiet moments. The citation told only part of the story. The rest lived in the scars on his body and the ghosts in his mind. Shadow, too, was more than he appeared. The German Shepherd wasn't just a pet but a lifeline, carefully matched to Marcus through the Wounded Warrior Service Dog program. The nonprofit had paired them after recognizing Marcus's struggles with PTSD and the lingering effects of his injuries. Shadow's credentials hung proudly around his neck, a professional service dog ID and military-style tags that declared his purpose to anyone who cared to look. But today, no one had. The guard hadn't seen the tags, hadn't seen the man behind the tag, only a problem to be dismissed. Marcus felt the sting of that dismissal now, sharper than he'd expected, as he sat on his apartment balcony that afternoon, watching Emma play in the small garden below. The rejection at the school wasn't just about missing Emma's award ceremony. It was the weight of being seen as less than, as broken, as someone whose needs were a burden rather than a right. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on Shadow's fur, the dog lying alert at his feet. The German Shepherd's steady presence was a balm, a reminder that he wasn't alone, even when the world felt like it was closing in. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, pulling him from his thoughts. A notification from the community Facebook page lit up the screen, and his stomach twisted as he saw the headline. A video of the morning's confrontation, uploaded by a parent who'd witnessed it all. He hesitated, then tapped the screen, bracing himself. The comments beneath the video were a gut punch. Why do these vets think they're above the rules, always wanting special treatment? Another read, "My kid has allergies. His health matters more than some guy's comfort animal." The worst one, though, hit like a knife. If he's too damaged to function without a dom, maybe he shouldn't be around kids. Marcus's breath caught, his pulse quickening. Shadow sensed it immediately, pressing his body against Marcus's legs with deliberate pressure, grounding him as the anxiety threatened to spiral. Marcus rested a hand on the dog's head, focusing on the warmth, the texture of the fur, anything but the venom in those words. He wanted to scream, to tell them they didn't understand, that Shadow wasn't a crutch but a necessity, that his sacrifices had earned him the right to be here, to be seen. But the words stayed locked inside, heavy and unspoken. An hour later, his sister Diane's voice crackled through the phone, brimming with fury. "This is outrageous, Marcus. They can't do this to you. It's discrimination, plain and simple." Her indignation was a fire, burning bright where Marcus's had begun to flicker. "I'm calling the school board. They need to answer for this." Marcus sighed, exhaustion seeping into his bones. "Let it go, Di," he said, his voice low. "It's not worth putting Emma in the middle of a fight." But Diane wasn't having it. "The hell it isn't. Emma was in tears when I got home, Marcus. She kept saying it wasn't fair that Shadow couldn't come in, that he helps you. She's 9, and even she gets it. Why can't they?" Marcus closed his eyes, picturing Emma's fierce loyalty, her small hands clenched into fists as she defended him. It warmed him and broke him in all at once. "I'll talk to her," he said quietly. "I'll explain that sometimes people just don't understand." Diane's voice softened, but the edge remained. "No, Marcus, sometimes people need to be made to understand." The call ended, but the words lingered, stirring something in him he wasn't ready to face. That evening, as he tried to settle into his routine, dinner, a walk with Shadow, a moment of quiet on the balcony, the incident replayed in his mind like a loop he couldn't escape. The guard's dismissive tone, Emma's tears, the whispers of the crowd, they all pressed against him, heavier than the explosion that had changed his life years ago. A local news website had picked up the story, publishing a brief article that recounted the confrontation with a clinical detachment that made Marcus feel like a specimen under a microscope. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. The truth of who he was, what he'd done, and what he carried was his to bear, whether the world understood or not. Shadow pressed closer, and Marcus let out a slow breath, grounding himself in the present. For now, that was enough. Marcus Hale sat in the dim glow of his living room, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his chest. The local newspaper's headlines still burned in his mind. "Veteran causes disruption at elementary school awards ceremony." The words felt like a betrayal, a twisted narrative that painted him as the villain for simply existing with his service dog, Shadow, by his side. The article hadn't mentioned a word about the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, or his legal right to have Shadow with him. Instead, it framed his presence at his daughter Emma's awards ceremony as an intrusion, a spectacle. The sting of those words lingered, sharp and unrelenting, as he replayed the moment in his head. The security guard's dismissive tone, the whispers from parents in the crowd, the way Emma's proud smile had faltered when she saw her father being escorted out. Later that evening, as Marcus scrolled through his phone, a barrage of anonymous text messages began to appear, each one a fresh wound. "Not everyone wants to deal with your problems. Keep your PTSD dog at home." Yena's another read, "School is for normal kids, not military propaganda." Each message was a dagger, slicing through the pride he'd once carried for his service in Afghanistan. He'd lost teammates, brothers in arms who'd never made it home, and nearly his own life in an explosion that left scars both visible and hidden. Yet here he was, reduced to an attention seeker in the eyes of strangers, a man demanding special treatment when all he wanted was the basic respect owed to him under the law. Marcus deleted each text without responding, but the words burrowed deep, feeding the isolation that had haunted him since his return from war. Sleep eluded him that night, another cruel reminder of the insomnia that had become a constant companion since his medical discharge. As he lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Shadow rested his head on Marcus's chest, his steady breathing a quiet anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Then, just past midnight, his phone buzzed with an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address, jparker@state.gov. The message was brief, but carried a weight that caught Marcus off guard. "Mr. Hale, I apologize for what happened today. Please don't lose faith. We forwarded documentation of the incident to the appropriate authorities. This isn't over." Marcus read it again, his brow furrowing. Who was Jay Parker? How had they gotten his email? And what did they mean by appropriate authorities? The cryptic nature of the message left him uneasy, a mix of hope and suspicion swirling in his chest. Before he could respond, another email arrived. There was this one from Dr. Rebecca Chen, the principal of Westfield Elementary. Dr. Chen's email was a stark contrast to the first. "Mr. Hale, I understand there was an unfortunate incident this morning regarding your service animal. While we sympathize with your situation, I must inform you that disrupting school functions can have legal consequences." Our security staff are authorized to make judgment calls regarding the campus safety. I trust this matter is now resolved. The words dripped with formality, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Marcus was the problem, not the school's failure to honor his rights. The implied threat, legal consequences, felt like a slap in the face, a cold dismissal of the federal protections he'd tried to explain to the security guard. Marcus set his phone down, his hands trembling slightly as a familiar wave of isolation washed over him. It was the same disconnection he'd felt when he first returned from Afghanistan, when the ideals he'd fought for, freedom, fairness, justice, seemed to crumble in the face of a society that didn't always live up to them. Shadow sensed his distress, nudging closer and resting his head on Marcus's knee. Those dark, soulful eyes watched him with unwavering loyalty, a silent promise that at least one being in this world understood. "They didn't teach us how to fight this kind of battle, did they, boy?" Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he scratched behind Shadow's ears. The mock let out a soft whine, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. For Marcus, Shadow wasn't just a service dog, he was a lifeline, a partner who sensed the onset of panic attacks before Marcus could, who pressed his weight against him during episodes to ground him, who gave him a reason to keep going when the darkness of depression threatened to swallow him whole. The next morning brought another blow. An email from Westfield Elementary arrived, this time a formal notice. It stated that Marcus was prohibited from disrupting school functions, and that any future visits to the campus would require prior administrative approval. The words felt like a banishment, a declaration that he was an outsider in a place meant to celebrate his daughter's achievements. Marcus printed the email, his movements deliberate, and placed it in a folder alongside a well-worn copy of the ADA service animal regulations he tried to show the security guard. Sitting at his small desk, he began researching disability rights attorneys, his jaw set with a quiet determination. Shadow lay at his feet, ever watchful, as Marcus murmured to him, "We defended their freedom, didn't we? Maybe it's time someone defended ours." 3 days later, Marcus sat in his living room, the folder of documents spread out before him. The attorney he'd consulted had been unequivocal. Westfield Elementary had violated federal law by denying him access with Shadow, and he had grounds for a substantial lawsuit. The lawyer's confidence was a small comfort, but Marcus hesitated, his mind heavy with concern for Emma. She was only 9, proud of her academic award, and blissfully unaware of the deeper implications of what had happened. A public legal battle could thrust her into the spotlight, potentially making her a target for bullying or resentment from peers and parents who didn't understand. The thought of her suffering for his fight twisted his gut, yet the injustice of it all gnawed at him just as fiercely. Shadow, ever attuned to Marcus's stress, pressed closer, his warm weight a steadying presence. Marcus looked down at the dog, his heart swelling with gratitude. Shadow had been with him through the worst of it, through the nightmares that jolted him awake, through the days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, through the moments when the weight of his invisible wounds threatened to crush him. Shadow wasn't just a service dog, he was a testament to survival, a reminder of why Marcus kept fighting. But as he sat there, Marcus couldn't shake the broader implications of what had happened. His rejection at the school wasn't just a personal slight. It was a reflection of a society that often turned a blind eye to the sacrifices of veterans, to the invisible scars they carried, to the rights they were entitled to, but too often denied. For every veteran like him, with a service dog, there were countless others whose disabilities went unseen, their struggles dismissed by a world eager to move on from the cost of war. Marcus sat at his worn oak desk, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his chest. Shadow, his loyal service dog, lay curled at his feet, the gentle rise and fall of the dog's breathing a quiet comfort in the otherwise still room. The memory of the previous day's humiliation at Westfield Elementary stung like an open wound. He could still feel the security guard's dismissive tone, the way the man's eyes had lingered on Shadow's service vest with suspicion, as if Marcus, a Marine Corps veteran with a silver star for valor, were some kind of imposter. The injustice churned in his gut, not just for himself, but for every veteran who might face the same indignity. "It's bigger than us, isn't it, boy?" he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper as he reached down to stroke Shadow's sleek fur. The dog's warm brown eyes met his, steady and unwavering, offering a silent reassurance that grounded Marcus in the moment. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the blank document on his laptop screen. Filing a lawsuit felt like a natural response, an act of defiance against the school's blatant violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But as his fingers hovered over the keyboard, doubt crept in. A lawsuit would drag on, pulling him into a legal quagmire, and what would it achieve? Retribution, perhaps, but not understanding, not change. He thought of the next veteran who might walk through those school doors with a service dog, only to be turned away. That was what mattered. With a resolute exhale, he began drafting a formal complaint to the Department of Justice. His words were deliberate, stripped of the anger that simmered beneath the surface, each sentence carefully crafted to lay out the facts with clarity and precision. This wasn't about his pride. It was about ensuring no one else would feel the sting of being denied their rights. The sharp ring of his phone shattered the silence. Marcus glanced at the caller ID, Westfield Elementary. His heart sank, anticipating another confrontation, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Hale?" The voice on the other end belonged to Miss Winters, Emma's teacher, her tone cautious yet warm. "I'm calling about tomorrow's assembly. We're having a special presentation on citizenship, and I think it's really important that Emma's family attends." Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. After yesterday, the thought of stepping back into that school felt like walking into a lion's den. "I appreciate the invitation," he began, his voice tight. "But given what happened—" "Please," Miss Winters interrupted, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if she were sharing a secret. "It's important. And bring Shadow." Something in her tone, earnest, almost pleading, caught him off guard. It wasn't just politeness. There was a weight to her words, a quiet insistence that stirred his curiosity. He hesitated, his gaze drifting to Emma's school bag hanging by the door, then to Shadow, who lifted his head, as if sensing the shift in Marcus's mood. Maybe this was a chance to show Emma that standing up for what's right didn't always mean fighting. "All right," he said finally. "We'll be there." The next morning, Marcus felt a knot of apprehension as he and Emma approached Westfield Elementary. Shadow walked beside them, his service vest neatly in place, his steps steady and disciplined. Emma, oblivious to the tension that gripped her father, bounced with excitement, her pigtails swinging as she chattered about the assembly. Marcus forced a smile, but his eyes scanned the entrance warily. To his relief, a different security guard stood at the door, a young woman with a bright smile who knelt to greet Shadow with a gentle pat. "Just sign the visitor log, please," she said warmly, her demeanor a stark contrast to the hostility Marcus had faced the day before. He exhaled, the tightness in his chest easing slightly as he scrawled his name. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, their voices a lively hum, while parents and teachers lined the walls, exchanging quiet conversation. Marcus and Emma found a spot at the back, Shadow settling calmly at Marcus's feet. On stage, Principal Chen stood at the microphone, leading the Pledge of Allegiance with practiced authority. Her gaze swept the room, and when her eyes landed on Marcus and Shadow, they widened in unmistakable surprise. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of unease cross her face, but she quickly regained her composure as the pledge concluded. Clearing her throat, Principal Chen stepped forward. "Before we proceed with our regular assembly, I need to address an important matter that has come to my attention," she began, her voice steady but tinged with something Marcus couldn't quite place. Nervousness, perhaps? Before she could continue, the PA system crackled to life, cutting her off. "Dr. Chen, please take an urgent call from the governor's office in your office immediately." A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium. Marcus felt Emma's small hand tighten in his, her wide eyes searching his face for answers he didn't have. Parents exchanged bewildered glances, and teachers whispered among themselves, their murmurs blending into a low hum of confusion. 5 minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The auditorium grew restless, students fidgeting as the adults' whispers grew louder. When Principal Chen finally returned, her face was ashen, her usual confidence replaced by a visible tremor in her hands. She approached the microphone with slow, deliberate steps, as if bracing herself for what she had to say. "Students and parents," she began, her voice faltering slightly, "I've just spoken with Governor Matthews." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting briefly to Marcus before returning to the crowd. It appears our school has been involved in a significant violation of federal law regarding the rights of a decorated veteran. The auditorium fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the room like a heavy fog. Before she could elaborate, the PA system crackled again, and a deep, authoritative voice filled the space. "This is Governor Matthews speaking directly to the Westfield Elementary community," the voice announced, commanding instant attention. "It has come to my attention through multiple channels that a Marine Corps veteran with a Silver Star for Valor was denied entry to your school with his properly certified service dog, in direct violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." Marcus felt a flush of heat creep up his neck as every eye in the room seemed to turn toward him. He stood straighter, his hand resting on Shadow's head, grounding himself in the dog's calm presence. Emma looked up at him, her face a mixture of pride and confusion, as if she were trying to piece together why her father was suddenly the center of attention. The governor's voice continued, unwavering. "Former Captain Marcus Hale served 3 combat tours, defending the very freedoms we often take for granted. The traumatic brain injury he sustained while saving fellow Marines earned him not only a Silver Star, but also the right to have his service animal accompany him in all public facilities, including schools." Miss Winters appeared at Marcus's side, her expression gentle but resolute. "Come with me," she whispered, guiding him and Emma toward the front of the auditorium. Shadow moved in perfect sync, his training evident in every precise step. Students craned their necks to watch, some whispering in awe at the sight of the dog's disciplined demeanor. Marcus felt exposed, every step amplifying the weight of the moment, but he kept his focus on Emma's small hand in his, her trust anchoring him. The governor's voice grew firmer. "I am personally disappointed that a school in our state would fail to understand and honor both federal law and our obligation to those who have served. This isn't merely about following regulations. It's about showing proper respect to those who have sacrificed for our country." Principal Chen stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her face a mask of mortification, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Marcus could almost feel the turmoil radiating from her, shame perhaps, or the dawning realization of the gravity of her school's mistake. For a moment he felt a pang of sympathy, but it was fleeting. This wasn't about her. It was about Emma, Shadow, and every veteran who deserved better. The auditorium buzzed with a tense undercurrent as the governor's voice echoed through the speakers, each word landing like a stone in still water. Marcus, standing near the back with Shadow at his side, felt his chest tighten. The governor's announcement wasn't just a directive, it was a reckoning. "I'm ordering the State Department of Education to roll out mandatory ADA compliance training for every school employee, starting right here at Westfield Elementary," the governor declared, his tone firm yet measured. Marcus's fingers twitched, brushing against Shadow's sleek fur, grounding himself in the dog's steady presence. The governor wasn't done. "Next week, I'll be visiting your school to personally present Captain Hale with a state honor medal and to recognize his service dog, Shadow, with the first ever service dog of honor designation in our state's history." Marcus's heart pounded as he moved toward the front of the auditorium, Shadow's paws clicking softly against the polished floor. Hundreds of eyes followed them, students, teachers, parents, all staring at the man and dog they'd brushed off just days ago. The weight of their gazes pressed against him, a mix of curiosity, guilt, and something he couldn't quite name. He stood taller, his military bearing instinctive, but inside a storm churned. He hadn't asked for this moment, this public vindication. All he'd wanted was to be there for his niece, Emma, with Shadow's support as the law allowed. Yet here he was, the veteran they dismissed, now defended by the state's highest authority. The governor's voice softened but carried an unmistakable edge. "Until my visit, I expect Captain Hale and Shadow to be treated with every courtesy and respect owed to them under federal law and basic human decency. America's promise to her veterans doesn't end when they hang up their uniforms. That's when our true duty begins." The screen flickered, and the connection cut off, leaving the room in a stunned silence. Marcus's throat tightened, not from anger, but from the weight of those words. He'd carried the invisible scars of Afghanistan for years, and now, in this unexpected moment, someone saw them, saw him. Principal Chen stepped to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Her face was pale, her usual composure fraying at the edges. "Captain Hale," she began, her voice amplified but unsteady. "On behalf of Westfield Elementary, I offer our deepest apologies for how you and Shadow were treated. We failed to uphold the law and the values we strive to instill in our students." She gestured toward the stage, her eyes pleading for understanding. "Would you and Shadow please join me?" Marcus hesitated, his boots rooted to the floor. The invitation felt like a spotlight he didn't want, but Shadow nudged his leg, a quiet reminder of their partnership. With a slow breath, he climbed the steps, Shadow moving with fluid grace beside him. Standing before the packed auditorium, Marcus felt a tidal wave of emotions: pride, frustration, vulnerability, and something fiercer, like defiance. He hadn't chosen this fight, but he'd be damned if he let it define him or Shadow. Principal Chen handed him the microphone and the room fell silent. Marcus scanned the sea of faces, children wide-eyed with curiosity, parents shifting uncomfortably, teachers avoiding his gaze. Then he saw Emma, her small face glowing with pride and awe. Her eyes locked on him as if he were a hero from one of her storybooks. His chest ached with love for her, and for a moment he felt the strength to speak. "I don't have much to say," he started, his voice low but steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd faced far worse than a room full of stares. "Shadow and I didn't come here for medals or apologies. We came because service doesn't stop when you take off the uniform." He knelt beside Shadow, his hand resting on the dog's back, feeling the warmth and strength beneath the fur. "This isn't just a dog. He's my battle buddy, my medical equipment, sometimes the only thing keeping me steady." What happened here wasn't just about us. It's about understanding that not all disabilities are visible, and accommodation isn't a favor. It's a right. His voice cracked slightly, and he paused, swallowing hard. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he felt the sting of tears. "The freedoms I fought for, they're for everyone, including those of us who need a little help to live fully in this world." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, and for a heartbeat the auditorium was still. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted. Students leapt to their feet, followed by parents and teachers, until the entire room stood, their ovation a roaring wave of respect and reckoning. In the weeks that followed, Westfield Elementary transformed. The governor's promised visit unfolded under a blaze of media lights, turning the school into a living lesson on service animals, veterans' rights, and the heart of accessibility. The outdoor ceremony was a spectacle of unity, with students lining the walkway, their faces bright with newfound reverence as Shadow strode past, his bearing as dignified as any soldier. Governor Matthews knelt beside the German Shepherd, fastening the Service Dog of Honor medallion to Shadow's vest with deliberate care. He turned to the children, his voice warm but commanding. "These animals aren't pets," he said, meeting their eyes. "They're professionals, partners who give people like Captain Hale the freedom to live their lives. Respecting them means respecting the dignity and independence of those they serve." For Marcus, the public honors were secondary. The real change came in quieter moments. The teacher who now greeted Shadow with a smile, the parent who apologized in the hallway, the children who asked curious, respectful questions about his partner. Emma, bursting with pride, told her classmates stories of Uncle Marcus and Shadow, her voice carrying the weight of a child who'd seen justice unfold. Marcus carried his own quiet victories too, the way he could walk into the school without bracing for a fight, the way Shadow's presence was no longer a point of contention, but a bridge to understanding. The community around Westfield began to shift too, as the story rippled outward. Conversations about accessibility and veterans' rights sparked in coffee shops and town halls, small but meaningful steps toward a broader change. For Marcus, though, the deepest impact was personal. Standing in that auditorium, speaking his truth, he'd reclaimed a piece of himself, a piece he hadn't realized he'd lost until it was returned to him, wrapped in the applause of a room that finally saw him and Shadow for who they truly were. The transformations that unfolded in the wake of that pivotal day left a lasting imprint on everyone involved, each person touched in a deeply personal way. The security guard, a man whose life had been shaped by rigid adherence to rules, found himself unraveling in the aftermath of the ceremony. As he approached Marcus, His eyes glistened with unshed tears, his voice trembling with a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. My brother served in Iraq, he confessed, the words spilling out like a long-held secret. He came back, different it, struggling. I never really got it, never tried to. I was just following orders, enforcing a policy without seeing the person it hurt. I'm so sorry. The apology wasn't just words, it was a reckoning, a moment where he confronted the weight of his actions and the humanity he'd overlooked. In that moment, he wasn't just a guard. He was a man grappling with regret, seeking forgiveness, not just from Marcus, but from himself. Principal Chen, too, was profoundly changed. The incident had shaken her, stirring a quiet unease about the kind of school she was leading. She couldn't shake the image of Marcus standing at the school's entrance, his service dog Shadow by his side, both barred from entry. It wasn't enough to meet the bare minimum of compliance with new training protocols. She wanted the school to embody something greater, a place where empathy and understanding weren't just taught but lived. She spearheaded initiatives that went beyond policy changes, pouring her heart into creating an annual Veterans Appreciation Day. It became a celebration of service, sacrifice, and the unseen battles veterans carried long after their uniforms were put away. She also wove lessons about service animals into the curriculum, ensuring students understood the profound bond between a veteran and their dog. But her proudest achievement was the art project led by the school's art teacher, a vibrant mosaic that now adorned the main hallway. It depicted Shadow in his service vest, his eyes steady and loyal, surrounded by the words, "They served, they stood, they changed the world." For Principal Chen, the mosaic was more than art. It was a testament to the school's transformation, a daily reminder to choose compassion over indifference. For Marcus, the changes were both public and deeply personal. Governor Matthews recognized his quiet strength and appointed him as a special advisor to the state's Veterans Affairs Office. Marcus took to the role with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his military days. Each morning, he walked into the office with Shadow by his side, the dog's calm presence grounding him as he worked to create programs that eased the transition from military to civilian life. Shadow, with his soulful eyes and unwavering loyalty, became more than a service dog. He was a symbol of hope for the department, a mascot who reminded everyone of the resilience and partnership that defined recovery. Marcus often caught colleagues watching Shadow, their expressions softening as they saw the dog's quiet devotion. For Marcus, Shadow was a lifeline, a companion who had pulled him from the darkness of his post-injury despair. The work they did together wasn't just about policy, it was about giving other veterans the tools to rebuild, to find their own shadows. But perhaps the most poignant reflection came from a 10-year-old boy named Miguel Rodriguez, whose words captured the heart of what Marcus and Shadow had ignited. Miguel had been there that day, a quiet observer to the confrontation at the school's entrance. In a school essay contest about courage, he poured out his thoughts, his young mind grappling with a truth that felt bigger than himself. "I used to think courage was loud, like in superhero movies. Big fights, big wins," he wrote. "But when I saw Mr. Hale with Shadow, I realized courage can be quiet. It's standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when people turn away. It's admitting you need help, like Mr. Hale does with Shadow." Miguel's words, simple yet profound, struck a chord with everyone who read them. He wrote of how Marcus and Shadow showed him that strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about facing your fears, leaning on others, and carrying on. "Captain Hale fought for our country, and Shadow fights for him every day," he continued. "They taught our school that being strong means knowing when you need someone by your side." For Miguel, the lesson wasn't just about courage, it was about humanity, about seeing the people behind the struggles. Marcus carried Miguel's essay with him, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of why he kept going. In the quiet of the Veterans Affairs Office, he often found himself reflecting on his journey. One afternoon, as Shadow dozed beside his desk, Marcus opened up to a colleague. "After my injury, I felt like I was broken," he admitted, his voice low as if the words were still heavy to carry. "I thought needing help made me less of a soldier, less of a man. It took Shadow to show me that strength isn't about going it alone. It's about accepting the hand, or paw, that keeps you steady." His colleague listened, nodding, seeing the truth in Marcus's words. And you, she said softly, you showed a whole community that lesson. Marcus smiled, his hand resting on Shadow's fur. The dog's eyes flicked open, alert to his handler's touch, ready to serve. Not just me, Marcus corrected, his voice warm with gratitude. It was us, a man and his dog, standing together. Sometimes that's enough to change the world. When a reporter later asked Marcus if he held any bitterness toward those who had turned him away, his response was as steady as Shadow's gaze. Shadow doesn't hold grudges, he said simply. I'm trying to live like he does. The words carried a quiet power, a reflection of the grace he'd learned from his companion. Marcus's story and Shadow's lingered in the minds of those who heard it, stirring a question that refused to fade. How often do we choose silence when we should speak? It's easy to walk past someone's pain, to tell ourselves it's not our fight, not our place. The parents and teachers who stood by that morning, saying nothing as Marcus and Shadow were turned away, weren't cruel. They were human, caught in the comfort of inaction. But Marcus knew something about risk, about standing for what mattered, even when it cost him. He'd faced enemy fire, survived wounds that left scars both visible and unseen, and still he chose to stand with dignity, not anger. His quiet resolve did more than any outburst could. It reshaped a school, a community, and countless hearts. Every day, we face moments where we can choose to be bystanders or builders of a better world. When we see someone misunderstood or mistreated, do we look away or do we act? Marcus and Shadow remind us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to stand firm, to lean on those who lift us up, and to keep moving forward together. The moment unfolded in a way that seemed ordinary at first, but it carried a weight that would linger in the hearts of everyone present. A man named Marcus, a veteran whose life had been shaped by battlefields and sacrifice, walked into a crowded public space with his service dog, Shadow, at his side. Shadow wasn't just a companion, he was Marcus's anchor, a steady presence that helped him navigate the invisible scars left by his military service. But not everyone saw the bond between them for what it was. A security guard, caught up in the rush of routine and rigid rules, saw only a dog where he shouldn't be. His voice was sharp, dismissive, as he demanded that Marcus leave with Shadow. The words stung, not just for their tone, but for what they implied. That Marcus, a man who had risked everything for others, was somehow less deserving of respect because of his need for accommodation. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, a mix of frustration and exhaustion. He'd faced worse than this, far worse, on distant battlefields. But those fights had clear enemies. Here, in this moment, the enemy was subtler: ignorance, indifference, the kind of casual cruelty that comes from not seeing someone's humanity. He could have walked away, head down, to avoid the confrontation. It would have been easier, but something inside him, forged in the fires of his service, refused to bend. He stood his ground, his voice steady but firm, explaining Shadow's role, his own rights, and the law that protected them both. His words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of a man who had learned to fight for what mattered, even when the battle was quiet. Around them, a small crowd began to gather, their whispers buzzing like static. Some were curious, others uncomfortable, unsure whether to step in or look away. Among them was a young student, barely out of high school, who had never given much thought to the struggles of others. She watched Marcus, saw the way his shoulders squared despite the guard's hostility, and something shifted inside her. She felt a flicker of admiration, but also a pang of guilt. How many times had she seen someone dismissed or overlooked because of a wheelchair, a stutter, a difference, and done nothing? She'd always told herself it wasn't her place to get involved, that someone else would handle it. But now, watching Marcus refuse to be diminished, she began to see courage in a new light. It wasn't about grand gestures or heroic speeches. It was about standing firm, even when your voice shook, even when the world seemed to be telling you to shrink. The security guard, for his part, felt a storm brewing within him. At first, he doubled down, his pride prickling at the challenge to his authority. He wasn't a bad person, just tired, overworked, and clinging to the rules that gave his day structure. But as Marcus spoke, calmly laying out the truth, The guard's defenses began to crack. He noticed the way Shadow sat patiently at Marcus's side, eyes alert but gentle. He saw the faint tremor in Marcus's hand, a hint of the battles he carried inside. And slowly, like a fog lifting, the guard began to see his mistake. It wasn't just about a dagger or a rule, it was about a man, a veteran, whose life had been shaped by sacrifices the guard could barely imagine. Shame crept in, hot and heavy, but with it came a quiet resolve. He wouldn't let this moment define him. He apologized, not a grudging mumble, but a real acknowledgement of his error. It was a small act, but it cost him something to do it in front of the crowd, and that made it matter. The incident didn't end with a dramatic flourish, though word of it reached the governor's office, prompting a public statement and an apology that made headlines. But the real change happened in the quieter corners of the story, in the hearts of those who witnessed it. For the guard, it was a humbling lesson in looking beyond the surface, in recognizing that every person carries a story he might never fully understand. He went home that night replaying the moment, vowing to pause and listen the next time his instincts told him to act first. For the student, it was a spark that grew into a new awareness. She began to notice the small injustices around her, the way a classmate with a hearing aid was ignored in group discussions, the way a stranger in a wheelchair struggled with a door no one held open. She didn't always know how to act, but she promised herself she'd try. That promise, fragile but sincere, was a seed planted by Marcus's quiet stand. Marcus himself didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a man doing what he had to do to live with himself. But as he walked away with Shadow, he felt a flicker of pride, not for the attention, but for the knowledge that he'd honored his own truth. He thought of the soldiers he'd served with, the ones who hadn't come home, and the ones who had but carried wounds no one could see. He thought of Shadow, whose loyalty had pulled him through his darkest days. And he thought of the people who'd watched, some of whom might carry this moment with them, might act differently the next time they saw someone treated as less. This wasn't a battlefield, but it was a test all the same. Not all of us faced the kind of trials Marcus did in his military days, where life and death hung in the balance. But every one of us encounters moments that challenge our character. Moments when speaking up might cost us comfort, when standing firm might draw stares or scorn. Those moments, small as they seem, are where we decide who we are. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can't always trace. The student might one day advocate for a stranger. The guard might train his colleagues to see people, not just policies. And someone in that crowd, inspired by Marcus's quiet dignity, might find the courage to act when it's their turn. The world doesn't change through force alone. It changes through people like Marcus, who carry no weapons but fight with patience, with principle, with the unshakable belief that no one deserves less dignity than another. Their battles are often unseen, their victories quiet, but they plant seeds of understanding, of compassion that can grow into something greater than any single moment. The next time you see someone dismissed, overlooked, or treated unfairly because of a disability, a difference, or a need, think of Marcus and Shadow. Think of the courage it takes to refuse to accept injustice, even when the world expects you to look away, and ask yourself, in that moment, who will you choose to be?